Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 74. Today, CJ and I have a couple news items and then an interview with Ted Pattison talking about business intelligence and Office 365 and Azure. Recorded live Monday, April the 6th, 2015. Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Link, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Andrew Connell.
And I'm Chris Johnson.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it. Hey, CJ, how you doing this morning?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing good. Hey, I'm going to apologize to you and to our listeners. I'm sorry that I had to disappear in the middle of our show last week. Right when we finished our little banter going back and forth and right as we're getting to the news, I was able to cut out some of that stuff. We thought we had kind of like lost a connection, but I had a neighborhood emergency come up where a neighbor of mine had to get to the emergency room and did not want to go by ambulance. And it was kind of an out of the blue thing. So I jumped and ran. So I appreciate you covering for me.
Yeah, no worries at all. These things happen, man. And hey, this is, obviously goes to show it's live and real.
Yeah.
Well, not live, but real.
Hey, you can see we don't do too much. We don't do too many cuts and stuff in this one. So we like to keep it nice and natural.
Yeah, and thanks for everybody bearing with me talking to myself last episode.
It's the vegan show.
Yeah, there you go.
So how did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. Summer's slowly arriving, so getting a few chores done around the house. Hey, here's a weird one. I've got a strange problem that hopefully you can help me with.
I'll try.
This is not too personal, but it's a little personal. I'm only kidding.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I've got this really strange problem on my computer.
Oh, I was going to say preparation H, but go ahead.
And so you know how you've always got those nagging family members that whenever you see them, they're like, I've got this problem with Word. Can you help me? Right? Because you're a computer guy, right?
Right.
So check this out. Like, I'm a computer guy. This one is really weird. Really weird. Hopefully it'll be like real simple answer. So my computer is losing its date and time regularly. Like, I set the date and time on it in Windows, right? Or I set the, update from the internet, little checkbox, whatever, or update now, and it sets the correct date and time. And then I use the computer for a little while, come back, even that same day, and it's set to, the date doesn't change. So say today was the 6th, right? Tomorrow, the date on the computer would still be the 6th. And the time just seems to be randomly set.
That's really weird. Have you gone in and looked at the registry thing where it actually checks to see where it's getting the time from, and can you do a manual sync and it pulls it down? Or
yeah, I can do a manual sync and it'll update it, and then it'll randomly start changing again.
Huh.
And then if I turn off and I was thinking, maybe it's getting the wrong date and time from the service, right? So then I turned off the automatically update thing, and it's still happening even though I manually set it. So my theory is that my motherboard battery is dying.
Oh, yeah.
But it seems really strange that the computer's running. Like, I leave my computer running the whole time, right?
Yeah.
So it sits there running, and the date and time still get out of whack. And I wasn't sure if that would be if that was a symptom. If that meant the motherboard battery was going or not. But that's the only thing I haven't tried that I feel like it could be.
Yeah. Stop at a drugstore and get one of those coin batteries. Actually, one of my servers, a couple of years ago, I built 2 virtualization servers, like Hyper-V hosts, and they're both running all the time, and I noticed the same thing. So now that you say that, I changed out the battery. The good thing is it's like a 74-cent or $2, swap it in, swap it out. Let's see if that fixes it.
Yeah, it was just really strange, and everything seems to mostly work except some random stuff like various authentication things where the time is part of the seed in terms of encrypting stuff. And like OAuth flows, some various OAuth flows don't work because of that. So anyway, it's for the most part the computer works, but it's annoying. Especially in Skype. Skype chat is all messed up because like I'll be replying and then halfway through the chat the text disappearing because it's all like sorted by chronological order of date and time. And so I'll be stuck 2 days in the past and it's like Marty McFly talking to himself in the future. It's really weird.
Let me know when that happens again, because I'll send you a couple messages when you're at work, since this is your home machine. I'll send you a couple messages that go back into last November to put some pretty incriminating stuff on there in case I ever need to get you later on, like FBI. Hey, go check his machine. They check his machine. Oh, you were talking to Andrew about this stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I wasn't.
That's right.
I'll go find something that's been announced, and I'll go find before it was announced, and I'll just say that you leaked all of it to me.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, buddy.
I'm looking out for you, buddy.
Yeah, so that's my weirdness over the weekend. It's actually been going on for about a week, but I just haven't been asked to try and figure it out yet. So I know I'll get there.
I had one of those things myself this weekend. I had somewhere Thursday afternoon or Friday, out of the blue, my connection was showing that I was getting 5 megs down and less than a meg up. And I could not figure out where it was coming from. I've got 2 NAS devices and 2 servers on my network, and then plus just various machines connected to it, from like Nest thermostats to tablets to phones, whatever. And it just would all of a sudden just come to a crawl. And I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And I finally started rebooting everything. And then poof, it all came back. But then it all went right back down to like 5 megs. So I finally went out, unplugged the modem, and let it sit there for like 10 seconds, plugged it back in, and it all came back just fine. And it's like, I'm trying to go into my router and trying to find, where's the setting and stuff. And I finally gave up. And this morning I was like, you know what? I'm sick and tired of seems like every 2 or 3 years, I spend $40 on a Wi-Fi router that lasts about 6 to 12 months before it goes on the fritz and you have to get another one. And I'm like, you know what?
Yep.
How many times are you going to buy that $7 tool that keeps breaking until you just say, you know what? I'm buying the $25 tool.
That's right. Dude, I feel for you. I was in this exact same situation, right? God knows how many routers I've got stuck in a bottom drawer somewhere. And then I was just like, screw this. So I went to Fry's and I just walked up to the dude and I'm like, what's the most expensive home router you've got? And this was like maybe a year or so ago, maybe a year and a bit ago. It was about in the last 12 months, I guess. I was like, what's the most expensive home router you've got? And he looked at me like, you're nuts. And he took me to this. It was new at the time, the Linksys AC 1900 or whatever.
Oh, it's got AC in the name. It's awesome.
Exactly. Well, that's what sold me on it, man. I was like, man, if this thing's going to work, it's going to be this one.
I've got my influence in all the power outlets all around the country, and now I got myself routers. So here we go.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, buddy, just rest assured that I've got great coverage of you in every room in my house.
That's a little scary.
Yeah. Freaky.
So does your wife. No, I didn't go there. Go ahead.
So yeah. So now when my wife complains about the internet, I just blame you. That's great. Oh, that's the problem with AC.
Actually, that's exactly what my wife does. What's wrong with the damn internet again? I'm doing a backup. Sorry.
Yeah. No, so it's great. It's but I shelled out for this. At the time, it was like ludicrously expensive for a home router, right? It was like $250 or something. And which, when you think about it, isn't all that much money in the grand scheme of things, but in terms of home routers, it's kind of on the expensive side.
Yeah.
And but man, I used to have 3 access points in my house to get Wi-Fi coverage, and I turned them all off, and now I've just got this one.
Yeah,
it's brilliant.
I'm on the fence. I got a buddy. He recommended one that he has right now, and he's like, I got my eyes on this one router. And I was like, oh, well, why haven't you gotten it yet? He's like, well, I have this other one. So he's like, it's hard to justify spending. I think it's like $270. He goes, hard to justify spending that on a router when the one that I have works just fine. So I'm like, well, I have a $60 router that doesn't work just fine, so I can justify it. So I go take a look at it, and it's like, holy crap, this thing is exactly what I was looking for. And of course, the one that you have, I just added it to my list of things to look at. So I have a list of things that it's like at night after the kids are in bed, and the wife and I, the kitchen's cleaned up, and we go plop down on the couch, and you turn on the TV just to veg out a little bit and do your thing. I have a list of things I usually sit down and look at that I've been looking at throughout the day. And it's like, oh, that's on the list tonight.
Yeah. It's worth spending some dough on, because it's just, when I come home from work, the last thing I want to do is be like the IT guy.
I am right there with you. I am so sick of it. Yeah. So I think I'm going to spring for the nice router, and I'm also going to spring for a new cable modem that I own and that I'm not paying a $12 a month lease for from the local cable company.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm just going to buy those two, plug them in, and say, what the hell?
I have the benefit of gigabit Ethernet all around my house. So I use phones and laptops, Wi-Fi, but everything else, like my Xbox, Roku, all those kinds of things are all plugged into Ethernet, and it's just rock solid.
So you use Plex at home, right?
Yep.
So, and that's running on your like your tower that you had, your PC, and then you use Plex through your Xbox One.
I use it through Roku and Xbox One.
Have you ever had where it works on the other one, so it works on like your different devices, phone, whatever, Roku, but when you fire it up on the Xbox One, it just spins and nothing ever happens.
Huh.
But the server's up and I can hit it from my iPad or I can hit it from the web experience. But on the Xbox One, it's almost like it just is an eternal non-connection.
No, I haven't seen that.
It's kind of crazy.
No, it used to be a pain off my old Xbox 360, but the Xbox One seems really solid.
That's the first time I've had this experience with them. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing it. So I tried to sit down to watch the F1 race from Malaysia when Ferrari won.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I pulled it down and then threw it on my server that Plex is connected to, and it's like, let me watch it. Didn't show up, and it's like, oh, that's great. I'm just watching it on a small screen then.
Yeah, no, it's a pain when that sort of stuff doesn't work.
Yeah. At any rate, well, hey man, I guess we have a little bit of stuff we want to go through.
Yeah.
So a little bit of news here that we have. You want to do one of these? You want me to take? How do you want to do it? We only have two things here. We haven't really planned too much on this whole one. We just
no. Let's knock off a couple of these news items real quick, and we can get into the interview.
Okay.
So the first one I'll bring up is an article that we'll link to off the highscalability.com blog, which is entitled "How and Why Swiftype," I think that's the way you pronounce it. How and why Swiftype moved from EC2 to real hardware. And this one was kind of interesting because, most of the articles that we see are all about people moving from, their own hosting or hardware set up with some sort of hoster, whether it be machines under their desk or in their own data center or hosted with somebody else, to the cloud. And this one is kind of the complete opposite of that. And so this one is written by a chap who's I won't even try to pronounce his name, but he's the head of technical operations at Swiftype. And they power search on over 100,000 websites and serve more than 1 billion queries a month. That's kind of their tagline, right? And so this is an article about moving from AWS and EC2 back to real hardware. And they basically walk through some of the common issues they found, things like, networking problems, hanging virtual machines, having to reboot things, unpredictable and performance degradation issues, and things like that. And so they just sort of walk through how they went about it and some of the challenges they faced. But I thought it was really interesting. Oh, and they summarize at the end about some of the results that they got after moving back to hardware. And I would kind of summarize it. Well, there were some interesting results, but the interesting ones that I think really popped were two: performance and costs, because these are kind of two of the big things that people talk about when they talk about cloud computing, right? They say, sort of unlimited performance, you're able to scale out, much more easily without real hardware involved, and much easier to scale in the cloud than on-prem, and that you can't do it as cheaply as others. So they said here that their cost decreased and that that their monthly cost of their infrastructure dropped by at least 50%. The article doesn't go into enough detail to really say categorically like, oh yeah, this would be applicable to everybody, because I doubt it, right? But in this particular company's case, they're saying 50% decrease. So it'll be really interesting to see what the background behind that is.
I had that was the exact same reaction I had. So I saw the article, I posted it into our little shared notebook here that we use for keeping our links. And I saw it on Hacker News. I jumped over, I looked at it real quick, and the first part of it, my first reaction was, I jumped to the conclusion, saw the same two things. That jumped out to me. Performance improved, which I can kind of agree. I can understand that, because if you're going from physical hardware to virtualized hardware, I can see where you would get a performance degradation when you go to virtualized hardware. Overall, the whole system may be faster, but virtualized is always going to be a little bit slower than on the bare metal. But the part that blew me away, I'm with you. Cost decreased, and the fact that it fell by 50%. At first, when I saw those two things, my first reaction was, I wonder if they were doing it right.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm like, everything that you hear is the exact opposite of what they said. Stability improved. Like,
yeah,
I thought that was supposed to be the other thing.
Deployment problems. Yeah.
Provisioning and flexibility improved. I was like, really?
Yeah.
Like, that's surprising. So it's really interesting. So, Swiftype that's the virtual keyboard that you can get on iOS devices that lets you do the same kind of like swipe style typing on your iOS.
Are you sure it's the same company? Because they talk about powering search on over 100,000 websites. So I wonder if it's just similar, like called something similar.
Let me see.
Add great search to any website is their tagline. Site search, mobile search, real-time analytics.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's called SwiftKey is the thing that I use, not Swiftype.
It's kind of strange, huh? Like, I wonder if they've gotten to I'm completely speculating here, right?
Pulling it out the wrong end, right?
But they seem like a fairly large customer doing, a billion queries a month. And I wonder if they've got a very specialized case. And so either their performance requirements are bottlenecked on a particular thing, their performance is bottlenecked on a particular thing that doesn't match very well with Amazon. And they've got closer control and a bit more control on-prem, and they're able to overcome that bottleneck. Because it seems like a fairly specific type of application, right? So I'm just wondering if it didn't suit their specific needs as much as somebody else would.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
That could be it. Or they could have gotten a spat with Amazon, and Amazon said, we're not going to do what you're asking, and so then they've gotten written a bag. We're going to slag you off on the internet post.
Yeah, someone's like, we do the whole I'm on the phone. My neighbor did that with Comcast the other day. The guy's like, he's like, I just want to cancel. Just cancel. The guy's like, sorry, I can't cancel it. And he said, look, I'm recording this whole freaking call, and you're about to get a YouTube thing. You're going to cancel my damn contract if you don't do this, or we're going to YouTube. Yeah. He's like, I'm sitting here, saw him was doing the middle of yard work. He's like, he told the Comcast guy, and my neighbor's got 10,000 followers, and he's going to retweet it, and you're going to get screwed. And I'm like, what the hell are you pulling my name into this? I'm a Comcast customer. I'm not losing my connection.
Funny.
I'm not a happy Comcast customer, but it works, so
there you go.
I'm not dissatisfied, I should say.
So it sounds like these guys moved for whatever reason. There's probably, there's always more than meets the eye behind these things. But I just thought it was an interesting post because it was, it flew in the face of what we talk about on the show quite a lot around perf and costs and flexibility and things like that. So it's just interesting colliery.
Yeah, it flies in the face of what not only have we talked about, but what the industry seems to keep pushing. But
yeah, exactly.
Interesting article, guys. Everybody go. If you're interested, go take a look at it. We'll have the link to it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Another link that I found, and this is one of those things, and I don't know if we've talked about this on the show recently or not. I thought that we had, but so if we had, apologies if you're hearing this again, but I'm going to file this under the category of right in front of your face, but when you see it, holy crap, what a great idea. So we know this thing about audiences that we have in SharePoint, both in SharePoint Online and on-prem. We've had them for a very long time. And the idea is that you set up certain rules that basically says if a profile has these properties in it, then put them into this audience or this category. And the way SharePoint works is it has to recompile the audiences and look at all of the user profiles, look at the rules, and add those people to the group. And it's not something that goes really fast. In Office 365, I think that processing is actually fairly slow in the sense it takes either a few days or a week for the audience stuff to get updated. But a friend of ours, Victor Wieland over in Stockholm, Sweden, has a post called SharePoint Online and Azure AD Dynamic Groups. So what this is a feature of, I think it's a feature of Azure Active Directory, the premium subscription, so not just the free stuff you get, but you can create a group in Azure AD. You can set up it's basically the exact same concept as audiences. It's just Azure AD calls them dynamic groups. But because of that, when you go into use SharePoint to target content to specific people, instead of putting a user in there, you use an Active Directory group, and you can use a dynamic group as an Active Directory group. And so you're effectively getting the exact same capability as an audience. But audiences were never used for securing content or used for targeting content. And this way you can actually have a on-the-fly kind of a mix between the two. Is one of those posts that when I saw it, I was like, that's a freaking brilliant application of this inside SharePoint. So
do you know how often the groups get updated? Is it truly dynamic, or is it sort of periodic? And I mean, even if periodic is, once every 10 minutes type thing. I
was trying to find this right a minute ago when you were talking about our last news bit item. I don't have anything that I can point to, but for some reason, I believe it's something like in magnitude of like 15 minutes.
Yeah, gotcha.
It's much, much more frequent and acceptable when you compare it to audiences.
Yeah.
It's totally acceptable for cloudy-based stuff today.
Gotcha. So it's not truly like real-time style dynamic where it's evaluating the rules of that group on the fly and building the membership.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty nifty though. So that means like he gives the example of creating a CVP group, like a corporate vice president group, and rather than having to manually put people in and out of it, take people in, or put people in, take people out, you can you build a group and say add users where the job title contains CVP, and that's pretty cool, right? So that means somebody joins the company, their job title is CVP of whatever, and they're automatically added to this group, and that gives them access to some sort of secret squirrel CVP members club thing.
Yep, agreed. That's pretty cool.
I guess you just can't let people update their job title without understanding the security implications. Agreed.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. I thought it was a great use of something that I know people have bumped their head on. So
yeah, and in the past, I mean, it's been people have sort of treated audiences in SharePoint like security, but it's not, right? And this is kind of more in that direction, at least, anyway.
Yeah, so that's the bit of news stuff that we wanted to cover in this episode. What I also did is I sat down recently with Ted Pattison from Ctirical Path Training, and we kind of caught up on the business intelligence story that Microsoft has. So back in episode 44, we talked to, at the time, C. Henri from Microsoft, who had the business intelligence piece, was in charge of the business intelligence story for Microsoft. But what we want to do in this episode is just catching up with Ted. He has a new course with Ctirical Path Training and a seminar that they do around business intelligence. And so just spent some time chatting with him, seeing what he was up to lately, and talking about BI from a high level. So what do you say we play that interview?
Sounds good. Let's roll it.
All right, so this is Andrew. I'm sitting here today with Ted Pattison. Ted is a senior instructor and curriculum manager at Ctirical Path Training, a company dedicated to education on SharePoint, on-premises, and Office 365 platforms. Ted is in his 11th year as a SharePoint MVP and specializes in technologies related to software development and business intelligence. You can find more about it at criticalpathtraining.com. So Ted, how's it going today?
It's going great. I'm very much a fan of the show. Very happy to be on the show speaking with you.
It's been a while since I guess we haven't been on the show together, have we?
I don't think so.
No.
We've so much in person over the years, you kind of forget where we've talked, but I think this is our first show, or my first appearance on the show.
Yeah, we've done, I guess you and I have done a co-interview one or two times with, was it Rob Foster's podcast, the SharePoint Pod Show.
That's right.
Yeah, that's had a good time with that. But yeah, we got a long history together here. I've known you for quite a while.
I remember when I came up and did a user group talk in Jacksonville and talked about content types. And then you came up after and said, yeah, no one ever thinks about content types like I do, but you do. We kind of had that bonding point there.
Yeah, and then I think that we were
2006, 2007.
Yeah, I was working for one company at the time, and I was looking to get ready to go out on my own. And I think you had your training company that was just the Ted Pattison Group, and we had the local Florida developer evangelist the Ready launch event in Tampa for the 2007 launch of SharePoint, of Office, Visual Studio. That was like the WCF, WPF big coming out party, I think.
That's right.
I remember Joe, the developer evangelist named Joe Healy. He looked over at me and he goes, you're going to get out of your job, aren't you? And you teach. I was like, yeah. And he looked over at you and said, you're looking for instructors, right? He's like, yeah. And we kind of looked at both of us. He goes, you guys should make SharePoint babies. And that's when we kind of took off. And I know I was teaching for you as a contract instructor for about a year. And then we started Ctirical Path Training together back in 2009, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. Joe Healy is kind of a carbon-based match.com.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Yeah. It was a good time. But yeah, so I see Ctirical Path Training going strong. Lots of classes, a lot of new classes, everything coming out lately. It's cool, very cool stuff to see.
Yeah, just the landscape is changing. If we go back 4 years ago, it was all about SharePoint on-premises. But as the landscape has changed, there's more people moving, to Office 365, more people dealing with hybrids. And then, I had done database work way back in the 90s and really loved the analytical reasoning involved with understanding databases and optimization and writing SQL queries and stuff. And then kind of COM and .NET took me out of that, and SharePoint took me out of it. And then when I got back into the BI space, there's all these things that when my brain started, working with, it just like really dug in and really started liking the deep concepts involved. And the immediate results of you see, numbers on the page if you're doing your BI work correctly. So
yeah,
pretty satisfying from a cerebral point of view.
That's good, especially when talking about business intelligence. I mean, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. I know back in we're well on to like episode 70, 80, getting close to episode 80 now, and back in episode 44, I sat down and talked to, at the time, the person that was kind of like the big guy behind the business intelligence story for Microsoft, Si-Young Rhee, back in September of 2004. Sorry, September 2014. We haven't been on the air that long. But I wanted to sit down and talk to you a little bit about it, because I know that you guys have a class on business intelligence that you're focusing on. And I know Ctirical Path is also doing a webinar series that we'll make sure that we put a link to in our show notes that people can take a look to, is also for the class as well. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the BI story and get your take on it, especially from somebody from the outside of Microsoft, and kind of, where you see the growth and what your take is on the whole thing. So I guess when we look at a BI project, I mean, I know that years ago when I was involved in this, I did the stuff with like Cognos and Business Objects and all these big suites that were really expensive and stuff, and more traditional based stuff. But things are changing these days, aren't they?
Well, things have changed pretty drastically over the last, 5 or 6 years. A little bit of background is that there is this icon in the industry, a guy named Ralph Kimball, started the Kimball Group. This is back around the 90s, and started taking relational databases and figuring out basically how to distill, the operational data into BI data. And he created this very large life cycle that generally involves 10 people. And I'm not going to take away from, the value of this, but the proposition is it's going to take at least a year. It's going to take 10 people and probably a couple $100,000, to get it done. And then Microsoft pretty much, had been tailoring SQL Server, coming up with SQL Server analysis services, really along the lines of what the Kimball Group, was, advocating as the way to do things. But what we had is Microsoft had one BI strategy that really only works for very large scale projects. So if you have a medium to small scale project, you don't have a year, you want to see results in 3 months. Another thing about the Kimball project, it generally leads you down to building a data warehouse. So you're pulling data from all other places, and there's a lot of modeling involved and a lot of rules that you have to follow to do that right. And then building the OLAP database on top of that with SQL Server analysis services and multi-dimensional cubes. So both those are very large, time-consuming, cost-consuming aspects. And what we see now is that there's this big wave of self-service BI tools. And, there will be projects where those things will be optional. There'll be plenty of projects where they won't. I'm not going to say that, the tools that Kimball came out with are not useful. But what we've seen in kind of the absence of this new tool set is that people were creating what we call spread marts. One guy uses Access, another guy uses Excel, and we're pulling data from CVS files and storing them on one particular user's desktop, and basically redoing, 10 or 20 operations for each report, and then spending a day doing the exact same work they did last month. So trying to figure out, how we can kind of get an intelligent tool set so you can create a query one time and keep running it, and create a report on top of it one time and keep running it. And then if we need to do some serious data modeling, we have basically this new model that Microsoft introduced that gives us an alternative of the multidimensional model. So what we had with SQL Server is introducing, what's called the in-memory database, the X-velocity database, tabular database. Those are just alternatives that have the same thing. But what we see is the tabular model is far more like the relational model and doesn't require, a big brain or, 6 months of, getting your sea legs just to start modeling data inside there. And what we find with the tabular model is it works right in Excel. And, a business user, with a reasonable amount of horsepower, is going to be able to get in there and do things that used to require a cube in 6 months. So that's kind of what we see the landscape changing. And obviously, it's not just Microsoft, but this whole move towards self-service BI is pretty much an industry-wide movement.
So you are seeing this not just from the Microsoft side, but you're seeing other vendors doing the same kind of thing, kind of saying that we want to make it so you don't have this massive investment that you have to go through and stand up to be able to run your own reports or to go find the BI guy in the organization.
That's right. And I think, to some degree, Microsoft with SQL Server has really done great as far as getting market share in the big BI project. If you follow the Kimball lifecycle, SQL Server has just so many tools. And what you'll find is that there's a ton of extra tools you could pay another $100,000 for, but you don't need them because SQL Server does everything for you. So they have this huge customer base with BI, and now they kind of see all this self-service BI could be infringing, on their BI customers. So definitely they responded by coming up with, what they thought was a very competitive, set of self-service BI tools. They had a huge advantage, and they own Excel, so they can start adding their BI tools into Excel, which is pretty much what they've done. With this set of tools, which is pretty much Power Query for extracting and loading data, Power Pivot for modeling your data. So basically, that's the alternative to creating a cube, which definitely requires a BI developer. All of a sudden, if you get your data, into an Excel workbook, you can start modeling your data. There's this language called DAX, Data Analysis Expression Language, which is kind of like Excel. Doing easy things is easy. It's one of those languages where as you get a little bit harder and a little bit harder, all of a sudden you get up to, low-level developer, concept understanding requirements. But, as far as getting something in, that's very possible to do with the tool set. And then we have Power View and Power Map, which kind of are the reporting tools that sit on top of this new tabular model.
I see. Okay, so let me take a step back here because I know I got this question after the last time we did BI here, but prior to this Power BI, my understanding is Power BI is basically the all-up term for all the ones you just used: Power Query, Power Pivot, Power View, Power Map. Power BI is that's the all-up. That's what we use. That's the term we use for all the entire BI story. Is that correct?
Yes, and some people use the term more specifically. Other people, in some ways, it's kind of like ActiveX, a term that just once the marketing people see it, they start stamping everything with it. So really Power BI to me was kind of started as they kind of, shifted their investment from their on-premise, pretty much with SharePoint Server 2013 to the cloud. So basically they stood up, a service inside of Office 365 named Power BI, and then started stamping things that pre-existed with the Power BI stamp. So when you're using in the cloud, you're using the Power BI service. Those 4 add-ins in Excel are definitely, very central to how you strategically build a BI project. But that being said, they still work great on premises. They still work great with just Excel as a standalone tool without any infrastructure on premises or in the cloud. So I think now Microsoft is just kind of referring to any tool or anything that they're continuing to invest in the BI side kind of falls under the Power BI.
So Power BI is just a marketing term in a sense, is what you're saying. It's more a label or a brand.
It's a label or a brand. But then, as you get into things in Office 365, we definitely see the Power BI service. As we start using, PowerShell, we're going to see things that actually have Power BI in their name. So while there is kind of a fractured marketing, throw the term on anything, you see that some things are actually correctly labeled, with what the engineers, envisioned that Power BI should be.
Okay. And prior to this, we had a thing called performance point services, and that's kind of gone away. Is that correct? Or is that still around?
Well, I guess there is the two strikes, not the 3 strikes law, but strike 1 is that you're built on the multi-dimensional model, not the new tabular model. Strike 2 is you're totally infested with Silverlight, which we want to remove for our mobile BI story.
I got you. Okay, and that's performance point services.
That's performance point services, which if you have cubes and you're working on premises in SharePoint 2013, great product. It's going to do great stuff for you, and you'll find it does certain things better than anything else. But what Microsoft has decided is that it's not worthy of investment. Anything it's done, new tools that are going to be created are going to be doing that for us.
I see.
So basically, it's just not making the leap over into the cloud with Office 365 and Power BI.
I see.
So basically now we have Excel. You basically pull all your data into Excel. You run queries from Excel. You do all your pivot tabling and your reporting inside there. Or now Power BI has this dashboard that you can either create dashboard pages through the browser or through this tool, the Power BI Designer. Does the name sound familiar? But the idea is it's completely Silverlight free. It's trying to make the report building experience similar to what we've had in Excel, but there's going to be obvious differences because what underlies Power View and Power Map is Silverlight free, so we can hit mobile devices.
I see. So Excel is used as the authoring tool, the consumption tool. Is it also used as the consumption tool, or is it primarily just used as the authoring tool?
Well, they position Excel as the high-end tool for business analysts that really, can wrap their brain around the data and perform a lot of analysis using pivot tables, using all the things in Excel. But Excel is actually optional. Mm. So what I could do is I could go to, Power BI sites, and I can start creating my queries with Power Query. For anyone who doesn't know about Power Query, it's just a really neat tool, and it is a huge part of the future of Microsoft's strategy. So it is a tool that you can use as an Excel add-on, and the idea is you're able to extract data, and then you're able to perform transforms through a user interface. And you can kind of compare that to what we've been using, which is SQL Server integration services and Visual Studio, which is very powerful, but yet totally requires a developer, project management, where Power Query is something that a user can basically just open up data in Salesforce, pull down their data, push their data into an Excel workbook, into the data model, and then start modeling it with Power Pivot. And what's really neat about Power Query is it's not just something where you pull down the data. It remembers the question. So you have this set of steps. Pull the data down. Take these two columns, split them into, combine them into one column. Take this other table, merge it. So instead of just having CA, I can now have California, and I can basically start loading the names of all the states. Mm. But the idea is you create these queries that have 20 steps. Behind the scenes, they're using this language that is like F# is probably the closest thing. It's unofficial, but kind of they're calling it M inside. And the idea is that Power Query business users create queries, create steps, but behind the scenes, they're creating this code in this language M, which can run inside the client-side Power Query tool. It can also run server-side over inside of Office 365 in a Power BI site. So now you create these queries, and if you're using a desktop tool, you have to worry about how much memory, all the data coming back to your desktop before you do something with it. But now when you write the query, throw it to the server side and let a very powerful server-side service extract the data from across the network and then refresh it whenever you want. That's a pretty neat story.
It seemed like there was always two big bottlenecks when it came to a BI project, which is one is the level of experience and background knowledge that you would need from the people that are involved in the project to understand how to do data warehousing, how to build the queries, how to go through and to do the reports and all that stuff. That required a certain talent or certain skill level that not everybody had. And then the other part was because you were working with such big amounts of data and working with such big and complicated calculations, you needed a lot of hardware. So you're saying that and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that the self-service side of it is what's alleviating the first piece of it, which is you have the ability more to do this on your own without having to be some data expert. You know the data, you may understand the domain, but you don't have to understand the data warehousing and all this kind of stuff. And then the other side is that you're alleviating the steep hardware requirement by simply saying, you know what, this is a perfect workload that can go to the cloud to where I don't have to worry about this stuff. I'll let them worry about the fact that, those old questions about I want to do BI, you need a super beefy box that's got 64 gigs of RAM and lots of CPU cores, and maybe you need 2 or 3 of these. That doesn't even come into play with the SQL box that you're going to need and stuff like that. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Taking a step back, I think if you take a BI project, you can typically split it out into 3 parts. One is the ETL, extract, transform, and load the data. Mm-hmm. And whether you're doing that, into a data warehouse and you have a very large scale project, or you're just doing it with Power Query into an Excel workbook, that's step 1. Step 2 is once you get the data, is it ready to report on? Probably not. It probably needs some type of modeling. And so that's where I can use, either cubes in a multidimensional database, or I can use this new tabular model. And then the final is the reporting phase. So what we find is the self-service tools generally are going to be used in the last phase, or the second and third phase, or all 3 phases. Mm. Generally, the first parts is where you kind of start with the people who are the most technical and have the most knowledge. So if we can do something such as have someone who's really good in this space, creating our queries with Power Query, putting them inside of Power BI, all of a sudden it's something that, you can just go and consume the query, and maybe the query is ready for reporting, or maybe I take the result of those queries, dump them into Excel, and I start modeling with Power Pivot inside there, so I can start doing a lot more analysis, such as let's look at revenues, but compare, this month's revenue to last month or to same month a year ago. So there's a lot of intelligent modeling that you can do. And that might be done by a business user, or if it's tough enough, it's done by someone with more, talent than that. But then the final step, the reporting typically is the place where we want the business users to come inside there and do their work.
I see.
So there's so much opportunity to kind of get the tough stuff done in either phase 1 or phase 1 and 2, and then really kind of leverage the self-service BI tools so that users can come in and see things. And, another thing that we see is this new set of BI tools for reporting is based on top of the tabular model. And so you talk about Power View, you talk about, Power Map, and those things totally embrace the tabular model and give very intuitive user interfaces. If you've worked with pivot tables before, you're going to be right at home, working with Power View.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about like what you would need to kind of get started and how you maybe get some a little more technical inside to help you like get to the data and do the ETL kind of bit to where you're now at a point where you can start doing your self-service BI. But I know in the past, we had developers had an opportunity to be able to get in and do some stuff with this. So is this really just an end user tool to build your queries and be able to consume the stuff that consume the different reports and charts and stuff that you're going to build? Or is there a way for developers to be able to leverage this inside of existing things or new things?
Well, I answer that by saying, you need to know what the end users are capable of. We saw in SharePoint, the .NET developers got in there and started writing all this code only to find SharePoint already does that. Why are you taking 6 months to write the code? So what I would say is any developer really kind of needs to get hands-on experience and just understand, the 4 self-service add-ins in Excel, which is basically Power Query, Power Pivot, Power View, and Power Map. And then once you understand those, you'll start understanding what you don't get automatically and where the developer opportunities are.
I see.
Certainly on premises, building a data warehouse could still be a very, valuable thing to do. Data warehouses pull data from other places, but they give you kind of this sense of, the data, and we can basically go through a lot of steps to make sure that the data is cleaned and trusted, so that as we start building things on it, we know we have trusted data. There's also things, as far as if you don't go with a data warehouse, you're just pulling data from some type of transactional database. What happens if you have a customer that made 10 purchases in California, moves to Florida, buys something else, and then you just switch the customer to Florida? All of a sudden, all 11 transactions get attributed to Florida, not California. So when you build a data warehouse, you can also deal with these things called slowly changing dimensions that start tracking the history. So when you have things like customers that move, when you have, products whose unit cost goes up and down, across months, so adding that aspect to many projects will be an important thing. And if that's a requirement, you got to build a data warehouse. And data warehouse is the point where you need a developer.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. It's an interesting problem. The one you mentioned about someone, buying a bunch of orders and moving from one state to another state. But if the geography of that customer actually has an impact, if that's an important, dimension on some of the reports you're using, you have to put that into account, because all of a sudden you just get this massive shift that could reflect something that is not really true. That's interesting.
And then SQL Server integration services, paired up with Visual Studio, has all these extra capabilities to go and look at the customer record. And typically in the data warehouse, we have a customer record that also has kind of a start on and expires date. And ultimately what happens is it just throws a second record for the same customer in there with different, dates for when that record is effective. And the tool set in SQL Server analysis or integration services, gives you things to deal exactly with the situation. It's a good tool set, but it's not easy to learn. Just looking forward, SQL Server integration services is on-prem. So when you're running SQL locally, what they're investing in up in the cloud is something called the Azure Data Factory, which right now is just PowerShell driven. But I would expect a lot of investment to go there, because we're going to have the same need to create data warehouses, but inside the cloud. So, for those of you who are in this space, looking into, the constant evolution of the Azure data factory over the next couple of years, will be a really significant part to kind of getting the same functionality in the cloud that we have today on premises with SQL Server integration services.
I gotcha. So I guess one question I'm curious about this too is that where does we've all heard the term big data. So where does this kind of come into play with this whole BI story that Microsoft has with Power BI?
Well, I would say that the whole tool set really kind of factors in at the very end when it's time, to pull the data out and put it, into meaningful numbers or charts. So with big data, you have some type of file mapping plan. And so the idea is that, you have something like a scanner in a supermarket that just has so much data volume that you can't use your traditional databases to model things. So they have these very efficient things that are, pretty much like dictionaries that we come in, we push something into a particular file, but yet we have lots of servers clustered together. So what we have is, this way to track huge amounts of data, but then how do you read the data? So Microsoft today is reliant on something that sits on top of big data called Hive, which is something that you can use to query big data and gives you back relational results. So I could use something like Power Query, and I could basically look at the data files directly, which is going to be very hard to get meaningful data. Or we could basically run queries with something called Hive, get back data, and either we can bring that into Excel and directly report on it, or what's also very popular, because usually these things are so big, is to run Hive queries and dump the results into a data warehouse. So I think what you're going to see is that you might extract data from Hive, put it in somewhere. You could continue to model the data, but also just the reporting aspect, is what is going to be brought to the table with Excel and also with the dashboard inside of a Power BI site.
So the big data piece and Hive and everything, that really is just going to serve as just another data point coming in or another source. It doesn't play into the whole Power BI story in the sense that it doesn't change anything. It's just that you're getting your data from that source being big data, or you're getting that data from a CSV file. I mean, it's where the data is coming from.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So what are the differences that we have then between like a cloud-based story? And I know that there's still a significant number of people that are still only going to be on-prem, that can only do this stuff on-prem. And so where does Power BI, you touched a little bit on it earlier, that a lot of this stuff works in Excel just right on the client. So where would you kind of put that between the two different buckets?
Well, I think they really kind of got their story down on premises with SharePoint Server 2013, and then kind of shifted over to the cloud. And, to some part have been not focusing on SharePoint as they get the cloud story right. And then, I'm waiting to see kind of what happens with SharePoint Server 16, how much of the cloud story they're able to add back in. But what I'd say is, there's some pretty nice things for SharePoint Server 2013 on premises, in the fact that you can create a workbook. You can use, different ways to build the data model inside there. When you upload your workbook to SharePoint, it takes the data model that was inside the workbook and automatically upsizes it by creating a SQL Server analysis tabular database. And then all of a sudden, as you're going through a web page, when you're looking at this workbook and you're drilling into a pivot table, Excel services and SharePoint are basically just calling to the SQL Server analysis services database. So some of the rubs there is that Power Query was kind of late to the party. Kind of the story is, at first, Power Pivot, which is the modeling tool, they put some import capabilities, and then they started saying, well, we can import a table, but what if we need two tables who have the rows appended to a single table? They basically said, let's not do this with the same tool. It's going to be too confusing. So they basically created the Power Query project and put kind of the high-end extraction transform logic inside there. But now we have this issue where Power Query doesn't install automatically with Excel 2013. Not a big deal, you install it. But when it gets to the server side, if you have just connected to SQL tables in a data model, you got server-side data refresh. So when data changes, you can schedule once a day, once a week, however often you want to pull data back. But SharePoint Server on premises doesn't understand Power Query. So if you've done all this cool stuff with Power Query and you push the thing back, it's going to choke, when it tries to do the auto refresh. So you can see that now Microsoft is investing lots to get the Power Query server-side extraction story working. So, what we're really hopeful for is that, someday soon that will come back and make it on premises. And then I'll be able to work with Power Query and do a lot of things that, today require development work with SQL Server integration services, and to have those be running on server side. So refreshes could run automatically. And just think of the scale of the server side pulls back data, or you pull back data to a desktop application, push it to SharePoint, that pushes it to SQL Server. Which one is going to be more bottlenecked?
Yeah.
So you kind of see the architecture there where, and I can just tell Microsoft's investing so much in Power Query on the other side. If, once we get that capability on premises, it'll be a really nice improvement to have to the on-premise BI platform.
Gotcha. Well, I know you have a class on this that you got that Critical Path Training has pushed out in the last few months or something like that. So what kind of stuff do you cover in that class that if people are interested in learning more about it? Well,
my first mistake is not clarifying up front whether it was a class for developers or business users. So the first time we got the extremes. So we've refactored. And so now we have a 3-day class for business users that basically go through, all the self-service tools in Excel, and then how to publish to SharePoint Server 2013. And then also we cover SQL reporting services and Power Performance Point, just because they're usable, in the on-premises environment. We also have a developer workshop, part of our BI Infusions workshop, which covers the same stuff, but in a much quicker period. We basically very quickly go through what the tools do. Plus, when we get into things like Power Query and Power Pivot, you can kind of look at the language M. You can look at the DAX language in a lot more detail than you can with a business user, who would just basically, might gloss over as you, covered, some of the higher conceptual aspects of the platform. So basically, we have one for business users, one for BI developers, and, the curriculum is just going to evolve with the Microsoft platform. Today, we cover what's on premises and a little bit what's in the cloud. I suspect that within a year, we'll have something that's completely Office 365 BI, Power BI focused.
I gotcha. And you guys, there's an article that you have on your website too, right? That you published recently, fairly sized article, right?
I ripped off Stephen Hawking. It's called A Brief History of the Microsoft BI Platform. But it kind of talks about, the introduction of the tabular model, how to position against the multi-tabular model. Both are good, but one's a lot more expensive, so make sure you can justify it when you pick one. Talks about the self-service BI tools, talks about SharePoint Server, and it talks about just a brief intro to the Power BI service. So I guess it's really a high-level white paper. It's not going to be in the weeds telling you, how to get all the nuts and bolts hooked up. But just for someone who is kind of new to the BI platform and wants to kind of see where Microsoft is, what parts they're no longer invested in, what parts they are invested in, just to kind of give you a vision of, how to build your skill sets over the next, 5 years.
I see. Oh, very cool. You guys are also doing a webcast series too on BI, like a multiple webcast too, right?
That's right. So we're just doing some things we've done a couple already. We'll be doing them, up through June. We're doing different webinars for different things, but since the BI curriculum is new, we're doing about 5 just to try to, show people that we're invested in the BI space. We've done our research and we, not only understand it, but we know how to articulate it to make sure other people understand it, which is, I guess, one of the important concepts in teaching.
Oh yeah, definitely. I hear you there. So if people are interested in linking up with you and finding you, where are you going to be coming up over the next few months? Where can people find you?
Well, let's see. I do a lot of teaching out of Tampa. And, what we found is rather than going to all these cities, lately we kind of found, investing in our remote classroom infrastructure so that students can connect, can talk just like any other student in the class. They're doing labs on a machine that runs in the classroom I'm in. So if you're having problems with labs, I can grab the mouse away and say, hey, Bob, you click it on the wrong button, click this button instead of that. So that, and I'm going to be over in the UK for the Evolutions conference, sorry, which is one that we all love.
It's like a concert.
Yeah. And so I guess, the schedule that we have on the Critical Path Training website kind of lists the classes that we're going to be working in. But, we'd like to get back to Boston and Washington, D.C. as well. Those could be good areas. And we've just announced a strategic partnership with Combined Knowledge over in the UK. So I wouldn't be surprised if I do this class at least, once over there before the end of the year as well, over somewhere in London with Steve Smith.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Ted, thank you very much for spending time here. I think this has been really beneficial for the listeners, and it's been beneficial for me getting a better picture, too, on where we are today and when you would want to use one thing over the other and where we fit both in the cloud and on-prem. So I appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us today.
And thank you for the opportunity. This is a wonderful show.
Thank you very much.
Your listeners already know that.
Your $50 is in the mail. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Ted.
Thank you.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or an MP3 file and provide a link so that we can play your question on the show. Our theme music is an excerpt from Evaporated Eric by Monk Turner, used under Creative Commons. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find a full transcript and show notes of each episode. You can find us on Facebook searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.